For decades, scientists have debated something that could bring us to the root cause of all murders. Are killers born or made? Let's take Chris Watts, for example. As far as we know, this guy didn't have any physical or mental trauma during his early life, and yet he went on to exterminate his wife and daughters. Was his ability to commit this crime something he was capable of since birth, or did something happen that made him this way? The case of Mary Bell has been the topic of speculation since her crimes took place in the 1960s. She was a young girl who took 2 innocent lives, and it's believed that her vicious crimes could have been provoked by one thing: a head injury. Let's dive in. Mary Flora Bell was born on May 26, 1957, in Newcastle upon Tyne, a city in the northeast of England. Her mom, Betty Bell, was unmarried, mentally ill, and just 17 years old when she had Mary, and this was a complicated time to be a single mom. During this time, a lot of women in the UK and Ireland that were expecting babies out of wedlock were sent to mother and baby homes. These were temporary homes, usually run by the church, for pregnant women who needed shelter and support, and they would live in these homes until their babies were born. Most of the time, the babies were given up for adoption, and the moms were expected to return to their normal lives, never mentioning their time in the home again. That wasn't the route that Betty went down. She decided to keep Mary and raise her, despite the backlash and stigma there was about being a single parent. On top of that, Betty made money by working as a lady of the night. Not only did she have no idea who Mary's biological father was, but she often left her daughter alone for days at a time when she traveled to Glasgow for work. She did eventually marry the man she calls Mary's dad, Billy Bell, but this didn't bring a lot of stability to the family, as he struggled to keep a steady job and was always in trouble with the law. As Mary got older, her mom seemed less and less interested in raising her, often leaving her in the care of other relatives. One time, she even left Mary in the care of a random lady she met outside a clinic. According to reports, even when Betty was caring for Mary, she treated her terribly. Multiple relatives had given accounts of incidents where they believed Betty tried to kill Mary and make it look like an accident. Later in life, Mary claimed that her mom even put her in dangerous situations by having her interact with some of her mom's clients. A defining moment was when Mary reportedly fell out of a window and hit her head hard on the ground below. Witnesses swear they saw Betty push her out. This caused significant damage to Mary's brain, specifically her prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex controls executive functions like attention span, emotional regulation, and self-control. Numerous studies have found a connection between damage to the prefrontal cortex and some mental illnesses, including psychopathy. So it really wasn't surprising when Mary herself got a reputation for being a troublemaker. She was always disruptive in class and lied about pretty much anything, always looking for attention. On more than one occasion, she said that she had a strong urge to hurt other people. If someone had listened, things would have turned out very, very different. On May 11th, 1968, Mary and another girl, Norma, were playing with one of the local boys on top of an air raid shelter. According to the girls, the boy fell from the roof of the shelter and was severely injured. Many suspect this was one of the first instances where Mary acted on her aggressive impulses. The very next day, the police were called on Mary after 3 girls complained that Mary had tried to choke them.
Norma pinned us down, and Mary had grabbed us by the neck and started strangling.
When the police arrived, all they did was give Mary a lecture on her behavior. They thought this was nothing more than local girls playing too rough with each other. May 25th, the day before Mary's birthday, was the day things would take a dramatic turn. While playing in an abandoned building, 2 boys discovered the remains of Martin Brown. Can you guess who just happened to be hanging out nearby? Mary and her supposed accomplice, Norma. When the police arrived, they had to order Mary and Norma out of the building so they could investigate the scene. At this time, forensics and all the science that help us catch killers today just wasn't around, which made it really tough for the police to determine how Martin died. There was no blood, no broken bones, so his cause of death was pretty unclear. What they did find was a bottle of pills lying almost empty next to Martin, so they assumed he'd accidentally overdosed, thinking the pills were candy. The area area where Martin was found was known as Rat Alley, one of the poorest areas in Scotswood district of Newcastle. All the buildings in the area were being torn down, so they could be replaced with high-rise apartment buildings, which is why the building was abandoned. But where he was found, the press started to call Martin the Rat Alley Boy, which really hurt and upset his mom. The police knew there was something wrong about Martin's death, but they struggled to find anything to lead them to his killer. 2 days after he died, police were called to a daycare center after somebody reportedly broke into the building.
And officers found 4 pieces of paper. Scribbled on one were the words, "I murder so that I may come back," and "We murder, watch out," and on another, "We did murder Martin Brown."
The police discarded the notes as evidence, assuming it was just a prank. 4 days later, Mary knocked on the door of Martin Brown's home and asked to see him. His mom told Mary that he'd sadly passed away. She said she knew that Martin had died, but she wanted to see him in his casket. This was a super weird request for a girl Mary's age to make. In the UK, open casket funerals aren't very common. It's rare for anyone other than the family to see the body of the person that's died. Martin's mom asked Mary to leave. For 2 months, the case was totally cold and the police had no leads on Martin's killing. But then, another boy turned up dead. Brian Howe went missing on July 31st. And after what happened to Martin, a huge search was organized immediately. And yes, in case you were wondering, Mary was right in the middle of it. In fact, she wanted to help out so badly that she led Brian's sister right to him. She told Brian's sister that earlier that day she saw Brian playing on a pile of cement blocks on a vacant lot. Sure enough, when they went down there to look for him, there he was. This crime scene was a little different from the last one. It wasn't obvious what killed Martin, but in Brian's case, there was no question. There was clear bruising on Brian's neck that showed he'd been strangled, and there were injuries all over his body, made by a pair of scissors found at the scene. When Brian was taken away for his autopsy, the medical examiner suggested the culprit may not have been an adult. Despite the extent of Brian's injuries, not much force had been used against him, which suggested the killer didn't have that much strength. This was the first lead police managed to find that could help them solve both Brian and Martin's deaths. They started by speaking to the families in the area, asking if there was anyone they could think of that would do something so cruel and malicious. Everyone gave them the same answer: Mary and Norma. The police approached the girls and asked them if they'd seen anything unusual that day. They were especially interested in Mary's answers since she told Brian's sister she'd seen him playing at the same place where he died. Mary told them the same thing, except this time included another key piece of information. She said she saw an older boy in the same area with Brian, carrying a pair of scissors. It didn't take long for the police to figure out Mary was the one they should be looking at. For one, the public hadn't been told that Brian was injured with scissors. They'd only been told that his death was suspicious. Why would Mary specifically remember a boy carrying scissors unless she knew Brian was stabbed? Next, when the police investigated the whereabouts of the male suspect, they found he wasn't even in the city when Brian died. He was at an airport with his parents. With Mary's story crumbling, they brought Norma in for questioning, and she gave up the real story pretty much straight away. Mary was responsible for the deaths of both boys, and Norma, who was present for both killings, covered for her. At trial, Norma was acquitted of all her charges. This may have been because she wasn't very intelligent and easily manipulated, which made it easy for Mary to convince her to tag along with her. Mary was found not guilty of homicide by reason of diminished responsibility. Diminished responsibility is a defense tactic. It means that the person on trial isn't in a mentally well enough state to be fully responsible for their crimes. This isn't the same as pleading not guilty by reason of insanity, as the person can still be found guilty of a lesser charge. Mary was found guilty of 2 counts of manslaughter and given an indefinite sentence. Because of her age, how dangerous she was, and her clear symptoms of psychopathy, this meant she could be kept behind bars until the courts decided it was safe for her to go out into the world, if it was safe. She was sent to Red Bank Secure Unit, an institution that would later host another famous killer, John Venables. In September 1977, after being transferred to an adult prison, she and another inmate escaped and went on the run for 3 days. When they were caught, she lost privileges for 28 days. At the age of 23, Mary was given a new identity and released back into society. 4 years later, she had a daughter of her own and had to work hard to keep her identity hidden. When her daughter was a teen, the media discovered their location and revealed Mary's past to her her daughter, forcing the two to go into hiding and get all new identities. In 2003, Mary won a court battle that meant her daughter would have anonymity for life, when it was meant to end once she turned 18. This was also extended to Mary's granddaughter. Now in her 60s, Mary is reportedly still alive, but her whereabouts are totally unknown. The topic of her new identity has been controversial over the years. Many people believe she's being treated with too much leniency, allowed to live a normal life despite what she's done. Even though Mary herself now gets to live out of the public eye, the legacy of her cruelty will no doubt follow her and her family forever. That brings us to the end of today's video. What do you think of this case? Do you believe the world is truly safe while Mary walks free? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below.